Today, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum is presenting a digital reading of Frederick Douglass's famous speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." Born into slavery in Talbot, Maryland around 1818, Douglass became a key leader of the abolitionist movement. On July 5th, 1852, in Rochester, New York, he addressed the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society with this iconic holiday speech to share the African American experience at this period in time. The speech still resonates with communities today. Excerpts of "What to the Slave is the 4th of July" will be read by a collective of our community members and Reginald Lewis Museum staff. We hope you enjoy the presentation and reflect on our liberties from the past and now. Visit the Reginald F. Lewis Museum to learn about more African American Marylanders and their experience throughout history.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? I am therefore called upon to bring our humbled offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us. Would to God both your stakes and ours that affirmative answer be truthfully returned to these questions. Then my task would be light and my burden easy and delightful. For who is so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warn him? Who so obdurate and deed to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish would not give us his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee when the chains of servitude had been torn from his limbs? I am not that man. In case, like that, the dumb might eloquently speak, and the lame man as an heart. But such is not the state of this case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought the light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in its feathers into the ground illuminated temple of liberty and call upon to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me? By asking me to speak today? If so, there is a parallel in your conduct. And let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation whose crimes towered upon heaven were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in irrevocable ruin. I can today take up the plaintive laminate and peeled and woad smitten people. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we were remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there, they that carried us away captive required us a song, and they who wasted us required us mirth, saying, Sing us one of those songs of Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth.
Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember those bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject then, my fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day and its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view. Standing there, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce, with all the emphasis I can command, everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me, that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just. But I fancy, I hear some of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? Or what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? That point is conceded already. Nobody doubts it. The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, no matter how ignorant he be, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? The manhood of the slave is conceded. It is admitted in the fact that Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls in the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish in the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue that the slave is a man.
For the present, is it enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race? It is not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and chiffering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding the sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, mowing, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God and looking for a hopeful life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that a man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is that a question for Republicans? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? Speaking of it relatively and positively, negatively and affirmatively, to do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. This is not a man beneath a canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant in their relations with their fellow men, to beat them with sticks and lay their flesh like lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them like dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to bum their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I would not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued is that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken. There is blasphemy in the thought that which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? That they may, I cannot. The time for such argument is past. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would do today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The property of a nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery.
Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere boastful. Mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour.
Go where you may, search where you will. Roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world. Travel through South America. Search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation. And you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern